The shuttle broke through the shimmering energy field that protected Station Meridian from the cold vacuum of space. Inside the small craft, Ambassador Daniel Cole sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, his gray eyes fixed on the viewport. Below him, the massive station spread out like a flower made of crystalline light, its 17 spires reaching toward the stars, like fingers grasping at eternity. Laura Bennett sat across from him, clutching her data tablet so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She was 28 years old, fresh from the Diplomatic Academy, and this was her first assignment outside Earth's solar system. Nothing in her training had prepared her for the scale of what she was seeing. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel turned to look at her, and for a moment his weathered face softened. "It is. Try to remember that feeling, Laura. In a few hours, you might forget why we're really here." She wanted to ask what he meant, but the shuttle had already begun its descent toward the docking bay. Through the viewport, she could see representatives from a dozen different species watching their approach. Some had too many eyes. Others had none at all. A few didn't seem to have solid forms, existing instead as clouds of colored gas or shifting patterns of light. The shuttle touched down with a gentle bump, and the door slid open. Warm air rushed in, carrying scents that Laura's human nose could not identify. Daniel rose from his seat, straightened his charcoal suit, and stepped out onto the station. He looked so ordinary standing there among the alien delegates. His suit was simple and well-cut, but it held none of the grandeur of the robes and ceremonial garments worn by the others. He was of average height, with gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of age and experience. If Laura had passed him on a street in any Earth city, she would not have looked twice. But there was something about the way he moved, something about the way his eyes swept across the assembled crowd, cataloging every face, every exit, every potential threat. It lasted only a second, and then he was smiling politely, extending his hand to greet the protocol officer assigned to escort them. The Vorthani high speaker waited at the far end of the reception hall. It was a massive creature, standing nearly 3 meters tall, the body covered in hard black chitin and compound eyes that reflected the light like shattered mirrors. When it spoke, its mandibles clicked together in complex patterns that the translator device in Laura's ear converted to cold, precise words. "Ambassador Cole, humanity honors us with your presence." The words were polite, but the tone carried an unmistakable edge of contempt. "We hope your journey was comfortable, very comfortable." "High Speaker," Daniel replied, his voice warm and pleasant. "The accommodations provided by the Council are most generous." Laura noticed several of the nearby delegates exchanging glances. The Kreth ambassador, a hulking reptilian covered in green and gold scales, made a sound that might have been laughter. Its small, cruel eyes fixed on Daniel with the look of a predator sizing up prey. They were led through a series of corridors that seemed designed to overwhelm and intimidate. The walls were lined with displays showcasing the achievements of the Council's member species: faster than light travel, planetary engineering, weapons capable of cracking worlds like eggs. The message was clear. These were the great powers of the galaxy, and humanity was nothing more than a footnote in their long history. Daniel walked past each display without comment, his expression revealing nothing. The grand chamber where the formal proceedings would take place was even more impressive. It was a vast circular room with a domed ceiling made of transparent crystal. Beyond the crystal, stars blazed against the infinite darkness. 17 platforms surrounded a central floor, each one positioned at a different height to reflect the status of the species it represented. The platform assigned to humanity was the lowest, barely raised above the floor itself. Laura felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as they took their seats. "Don't let it bother you," Daniel said quietly. "They want us to feel small. That's the point. How can you be so calm?" She whispered back. "They're treating us like animals." Daniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "I've been treated worse, Laura, by things far more dangerous than politicians." Before she could ask what he meant, the High Speaker called the session to order. One by one, the delegates of the 17 member species introduced themselves and stated, their positions on humanity's petition for membership. One by one, they found reasons to criticize, to doubt, to deny. The Kreth ambassador was particularly vicious. It spoke at length about humanity's violent history, about the wars that had scarred Earth's surface, about the weapons of mass destruction that humans had created and used against their own kind. It displayed images of mushroom clouds and ruined cities, of mass graves and burning forests. This species, the Kreth concluded, its voice dripping with disgust, is a plague. They spread across their world like a disease, consuming everything in their path. And now they wish to spread that disease to the stars. The Dominion urges the Council to reject this petition and consider more permanent solutions to the human problem. Laura's hands were shaking. She looked at Daniel, expecting to see anger or fear, or at least some sign that the words had affected him. He was watching the Kreth ambassador with the same calm, pleasant expression he had worn since they arrived. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something cold and calculating, like a mathematician working through a complex equation. When the Kreth finished speaking, Daniel rose from his seat. The chamber fell silent. Even the High Speaker seemed surprised that the human would dare to respond. Honored delegates, Daniel began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. You speak of humanity's violence, and you are not wrong. We have done terrible things to each other. We have created weapons of unimaginable destruction. We have fought wars that killed millions and scarred our planet for generations. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. But we survived. Every war, every plague, every disaster that should have destroyed us, we survived. And we did not just survive. We learned. We grew. We became better. He looked directly at the Kreth ambassador. Can the same be said of the Dominion? In your long history, how many species have you consumed? How many worlds have you stripped bare and left as lifeless husks? The Kreth ambassador snarled, but Daniel continued before it could respond. Humanity does not come before this council as conquerors. We come as survivors. We have earned our place among the stars through blood and sacrifice and an unbreakable will to endure. We ask only for the chance to prove that we can be good neighbors, good partners, good friends. He smiled, and there was no warmth in it at all. But make no mistake, we are not begging. We are offering, and offers, unlike pleas, can be withdrawn. He sat back down, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, some in outrage, others in what might have been grudging respect. The High Speaker struggled to restore order. Laura stared at Daniel, seeing him clearly for the first time. This was not just a diplomat. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous, and for the first time since they arrived, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. 3 days passed and nothing changed. The council met each morning in the Grand Chamber, debated for hours, and adjourned without reaching any conclusion. It was a dance that Daniel had seen before, in different forms, on different worlds. The steps were always the same. Delay, obstruct, humiliate, deny. Laura spent her evenings reviewing the day's proceedings, searching for some sign of progress, some crack in the wall of opposition that surrounded humanity's petition. She found nothing. The council had made up its mind before they ever arrived. This entire proceeding was just a show, a way to pretend that humanity had been given a fair chance before being rejected. On the morning of the 4th day, Daniel woke early. He stood by the window of his quarters, watching the stars wheel slowly past as the station completed its rotation. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, and for a moment, he did not recognize the man he saw there. He had worn so many faces over the years. The soldier, the spy, the assassin, and now, the diplomat. Each face was a mask, a tool to be used and discarded when its purpose was served. But beneath all the masks, there was something else. Something he had tried very hard to bury. His hands remembered things his mind had tried to forget. The weight of a blade. The kick of a rifle. The feeling of a life ending beneath his fingers. He had told himself that those days were behind him, that he had become something new, something better. But standing there in the starlight, he knew the truth. He had never stopped being what they made him. He had just learned to hide it better. A soft chime announced Laura's arrival. He let her in and found her face pale with worry. "Something's happening," she said. "The Mithrani have called for a special session. They say they have a proposal that will resolve humanity's petition once and for all." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The Grand Chamber was fuller than usual. Word had spread that something significant was about to occur, and delegates who had skipped previous sessions now crowded onto their platforms. The air hummed with anticipation and barely concealed excitement. The Mithrani delegate rose from its platform. It was a creature of liquid silver, constantly shifting and reforming, its voice like distant bells carried on the wind. Beautiful and alien and utterly inhuman. "The Council has deliberated long enough," it announced. "Humanity's petition has been thoroughly examined, and we have reached a conclusion." It paused, letting the tension build. "We find humanity unfit for membership. Your species lacks the maturity, the wisdom, and the basic civilized behavior required to participate in galactic affairs." Laura's heart sank. Beside her, Daniel remained perfectly still, his face revealing nothing. However, the Mithrani continued, "We are not without mercy. We recognize that humanity is young and still learning. Therefore, we propose a compromise. Humanity will be placed under the protective guidance of an established member species. You will be taught proper behavior. You will be shown how civilized beings conduct themselves. In time, perhaps in a few thousand years, you may be ready to petition again." The chamber buzzed with approval. Several delegates made sounds that their translators rendered as laughter. "The Kreth Dominion has graciously volunteered to serve as humanity's guardians," the Mithrani concluded. "They have experience in guiding lesser species toward enlightenment." Laura felt sick. She knew what protective guidance meant. She had read the reports about the species that had fallen under Kreth control. They were not partners or allies. They were slaves, stripped of their technology, their culture, their very identity. Within a generation, they ceased to exist as distinct peoples. They became extensions of the Dominion tools to be used and discarded. "Ambassador Cole," the Vortheni High Speaker clicked. "Do you accept this proposal on behalf of your species?" We all I can get by I'm psych, I'm suck, I'm sis, I'm guy, I'm guy, I'm was my size, so what so that Every eye in the chamber turned toward him. The single word fell like a stone into still water. For a moment, the chamber was absolutely silent. Then the noise erupted. Delegates shouting, some in outrage, others in disbelief that a human would dare refuse. The Kreth ambassador pushed its way to the front of its platform, its massive body trembling with rage. It was easily twice Daniel's size, covered in thick scales that could stop a pulse rifle, with claws that could tear through steel plate. "You insult the Dominion," it snarled, its translator rendering the words in a cold mechanical tone that did nothing to hide the fury beneath. "You insult this council? You insult every species that has worked to build galactic civilization while your kind was still crawling in the mud?" Daniel did not respond. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, watching the Kreth ambassador with those calm gray eyes. "Your species needs to learn respect," the Kreth continued, descending from its platform and approaching the central floor. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order." The other delegates watched with eager anticipation. This was what they had been waiting for. This was the entertainment they had come to see. Laura started to rise, to do something, to say something, but Daniel placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Stay seated," he said quietly. "Whatever happens next, stay seated and do not interfere." The Kreth ambassador crossed the final distance between them and stood towering over Daniel. Up close, it was even more terrifying, a mountain of muscle and armor and barely contained violence. "Kneel," it commanded. "Kneel before your betters human." Daniel looked up at the creature that loomed over him, and he smiled. It was a strange smile, almost sad, as if he was sorry for what was about to happen. No, the blow came without warning. The Kreth ambassador swung its massive arm, striking Daniel across the face with the back of its clawed hand. The force of the impact would have killed most beings. It was meant to knock Daniel to the ground, to show everyone in the chamber that humans were weak, fragile things that could be broken without effort. Daniel did not fall. He absorbed the blow, turning his head slightly to reduce the impact, and remained standing. Blood trickled from 3 shallow cuts on his cheek where the Kreth's claws had grazed his skin. It ran down his jaw and dripped onto the collar of his suit, staining the white fabric red. The chamber had gone completely silent. Daniel raised one hand and touched his cheek, examining the blood on his fingertips with what seemed like mild curiosity. Then he looked back up at the Kreth ambassador, and something changed in his eyes. The calm, pleasant expression was gone. The mask had slipped, just for a moment. And what lay beneath was something that made even the Kreth take an involuntary step backward. "You know," Daniel said, his voice still soft and controlled, "I really was hoping we could do this the civilized way." He was still smiling, but there was no warmth in it now, no humanity, just the cold, patient promise of violence. And for the first time since the proceedings began, the Galactic Council realized that they had made a terrible mistake. What happened next would be studied and debated for centuries. Every intelligence agency in the galaxy would obtain copies of the security recordings. It would watch them thousands of times, slowing the footage down frame by frame, trying to understand what they were seeing. Most would conclude that the recordings must have been manipulated somehow. The alternative was too frightening to accept. The Kreth ambassador stood frozen, its earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. Something in Daniel's eyes had triggered an ancient instinct. The primal recognition of a predator that transcended species and evolution. The Kreth was a warrior from a warrior race, bred for combat, trained to kill without hesitation. And yet every nerve in its body was screaming at it to run. It should have listened. Daniel moved. There was no wind-up, no telegraphing of intent. One moment he was standing still, blood dripping down his face. The next, he was behind the Kreth ambassador. One hand pressed against the base of its skull, where the neural cluster was most vulnerable. The other gripping its primary arm and twisting it into a position that should have been anatomically impossible. The ambassador crashed to the floor, howling in pain and confusion. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. 6 Kreth warriors rushed forward from the delegation's platform. They were the ambassador's personal guard, each one a veteran of a dozen campaigns, armed with ceremonial weapons that were nonetheless fully functional. Their scales gleamed under the chamber's lights as they formed a semicircle around Daniel, plasma blades humming with deadly energy. Laura pressed herself against the back of her seat, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to scream, to run, to do something. But Daniel had told her to stay seated, and something in the way he had said it made her obey. The first warrior attacked, was fast, impossibly fast for something its size, its blade cutting through the air in an arc that should have bisected Daniel at the waist. He wasn't there. He had stepped inside the warrior's reach, too close for the blade to hit. His hands moved in a blur, striking points that Laura couldn't see, but clearly the Kreth could feel. The warrior's arm went limp, the blade falling from nerveless fingers. Daniel caught it before it hit the ground, spun it around, and drove it into the gap between the warrior's chest plates. The Kreth collapsed, live but disabled. The blade lodged precisely where it would cause maximum pain without fatal damage. The remaining 5 warriors hesitated. They had been trained to fight together, to overwhelm opponents with coordinated attacks. But something about the way Daniel moved, made their training useless. He didn't fight like anything they had ever encountered. There were no wasted motions, no flourishes, no displays. Every action served exactly one purpose: to disable his opponent as quickly and efficiently as possible. They attacked anyway. They had no choice. Their honor and the honor of the Dominion demanded it. Daniel flowed through them like water through cracks in stone. He used their own strength against them, redirecting attacks, exploiting the joints in their armor, striking nerve clusters and pressure points that their own species had forgotten existed. One warrior found itself on the ground with both knees shattered. Another clutched at its throat, gasping for air through a windpipe that had been crushed just enough to incapacitate, but not kill. A third lay curled in a ball, making a high-pitched, keening sound that the translators couldn't interpret. 12 seconds. That was how long it took. 12 seconds, and 6 of the Kreth Dominion's finest warriors lay broken on the floor of the Grand Chamber. Daniel stood in the center of the carnage, breathing evenly, his suit barely disheveled. Blood still trickled from the cuts on his cheek, and now there was more blood on his hands. Purple Kreth blood that stained his fingers and dripped onto the polished floor. He had picked up a sidearm from one of the fallen warriors. He held it, loosely, almost carelessly, as if it was an afterthought rather than a weapon capable of burning through armor. The chamber was absolutely silent. Even the most talkative delegates had nothing to say. They stared at Daniel with expressions ranging from shock to terror to something that might have been reluctant admiration. The Vorthani High Speaker's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. This is unprecedented. You have attacked members of the council? You have Correct, Daniel interrupted, his voice still soft and pleasant. A member of the council attacked me. I defended myself with minimal force. He gestured at the groaning bodies around. Him, every being I struck will make a full recovery. I could have killed them. The first one, I could have redirected his blade into his heart instead of his chest plate. The second, I could have crushed his windpipe completely instead of partially. The third, he stopped, seeing the horror spreading across the delegates' faces. I chose not to, he continued. That is the difference between humanity and those who would call us savages. We have the capacity for violence, yes. Terrible violence. But we have also learned restraint. We kill only when we must, and we show mercy when we can. He walked back toward the human platform, stepping over the bodies of the fallen warriors without looking down. When he reached his seat, he turned to face the assembly one final time. Allow me to reintroduce myself, he said. My name is Daniel Cole. Before I became a diplomat, I spent 32 years as a field operative for Earth's Special Activities Division. My operational designation was Pale Horse. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. In most of your languages, that translates to something close to death. The Kreth ambassador had managed to rise to its knees. It stared at Daniel with a mixture of hatred and fear that seemed to war for dominance on its scaled face. The Dominion will not forget this, it hissed. There will be consequences.
Ow.
Daniel smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. I hope so, he said. Because what you saw today was me being gentle. If the Dominion wants war, humanity will be happy to oblige, and we will not be gentle. He sat down, laid the Kreth sidearm on the table in front of him, and folded his hands in his lap. Now, he said, shall we continue the negotiations? Or would the council prefer to take a brief recess? For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sounds were the groans of the wounded warriors and the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Then slowly the delegates began to stir. Aides rushed to help the fallen Kreth. Medical teams were summoned. The High Speaker announced a recess until the following day. Laura sat in her seat, unable to move, unable to think. She had just watched a single human destroy 6 of the galaxy's most feared warriors in less time than it took to draw breath. And he had done it so easily, so effortlessly, that it seemed almost casual. Who are you? She whispered. Daniel glanced at her, and for just a moment, she saw something human in his eyes. Something tired and sad and very, very old. I'm a diplomat, he said. I'm just a diplomat who used to be something else. He rose and walked toward the exit, leaving Laura alone with her questions and the echoing memory of what she had just witnessed. Death had removed his mask, and the galaxy would never be the same. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire through dry grass. Within hours, every major species knew what had happened in the Grand Chamber. Within days, the security recordings had been leaked, copied, and analyzed by intelligence agencies on 1,000 different worlds. Within weeks, humanity had become the most talked-about species in known space, not because they were violent. Violence was common in the galaxy. The Kreth had built an empire on violence. The Talari had waged wars of extinction. Even the peaceful Mithrani had a history of conflicts that had shaped their development. No. What terrified the galaxy was the nature of humanity's violence, the precision, the control. The absolute mastery of the art of destruction. Daniel Cole had defeated 6 elite warriors in 12 seconds. He had done it with his bare hands, using improvised weapons against opponents who outmassed him by hundreds of kilograms. And he had done it without killing any of them, not because he couldn't, but because he chose not to. That level of restraint required something far more frightening than simple brutality. It required practice, training, generations of experience in ending lives and knowing exactly when to stop. The intelligence. Agencies began digging. They pulled every file, every record, every scrap of information they could find about humanity's Special Activities Division. Most of what they found was heavily redacted or encrypted beyond their ability to break. But the pieces they did uncover painted a picture that made even the most hardened analysts pause. Humanity had been preparing for contact with other species for over a century. They had known with the certainty of a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself, that the galaxy would not be friendly. So they had created the SAD, a program so secret that most humans didn't know it existed. The SAD recruited from the best soldiers, spies, and special operators that humanity had to offer. It put them through training that would have been considered torture by any civilized standard. Physical conditioning that pushed the body to its absolute limits. Genetic modifications that enhanced strength, speed, and reflexes beyond natural parameters. Psychological conditioning that allowed them to remain calm and focused in situations that would break ordinary minds. The washout rate was 94%. Those who failed were returned to their original units with their memories erased. Those who succeeded became something else entirely. They became weapons wrapped in human flesh, capable of operating alone behind enemy lines for months or years at a time. Daniel Cole had been one of the first. He had joined the program when he was 22 years old, a promising young officer with a gift for languages and an unsettling aptitude for violence. He had emerged 3 years later as something his own mother would not have recognized. The files listed his operational history in cold, clinical terms. 17 confirmed solo deployments. Over 200 successful missions. An estimated 437 enemy combatants eliminated. And those were just the operations that had been documented. Many of his missions had never been officially recorded. His most famous deployment had been during the Contact Wars. When humanity first encountered the aggressive Talari hegemony, the Telerae had destroyed 3 human colony worlds before Earth's fleet could respond. They had killed over 800 million people, mostly civilians, including women and children who had never held a weapon in their lives. Daniel had been deployed behind Telari lines, alone. His mission was simple: cause as much damage as possible and make the hegemony bleed. He had operated in enemy territory for 18 months. He had destroyed supply depots and communications networks. He had assassinated military commanders and political leaders. He had turned the Talari against themselves, spreading misinformation and sowing paranoia until their command structure collapsed into chaos. By the time Earth's fleet arrived for the final battle, the Talari were already broken. Their ships were crewed by terrified soldiers who saw ghosts in every shadow. Their commanders were too busy watching their own people to watch for external threats. The war ended in a single decisive engagement that lasted less than 4 hours. The official history credited the victory to humanity's naval forces. The truth was that Daniel Cole and 11 other SAD operatives had won the war before the first shot was ever fired. Now, sitting in his quarters on Station Meridian, Daniel read the intelligence reports that had been streaming in from Earth. The galaxy was afraid. Good. Fear was useful. Fear kept people cautious. Fear prevented wars that would cost millions of lives. A soft chime announced Laura's arrival. He let her in and found her standing in the doorway, her face a mixture of emotions he couldn't quite read. "May I come in?" she asked. He gestured to a chair across from him. She sat down, her movements stiff and uncertain. "I've been reading about you," she said. "About the SAD, about what you did during the contact wars." Daniel set down his tablet, and I don't know what to think. She looked at him directly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "You killed people. Hundreds of people. Maybe thousands, if the classified files are as bad as the rumors suggest. Yes. How do you live with that?" It was a question Daniel had asked himself many times over the years. He had never found a satisfactory answer. "I tell myself that the people I killed would have killed more people if I hadn't stopped them," he said finally. "I tell myself that the wars I fought were wars that needed to be fought, and that my actions saved more lives than they took." He paused. "Some days I even believe it." Laura was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Did you know this would happen? The attack, I mean? Did you know they would try to humiliate you?" "I suspected." The Kreth are predictable. Their culture is built on dominance displays. Physical strength is how they establish hierarchy. Daniel smiled slightly. They couldn't know that humans have spent millennia learning how to defeat opponents who are bigger and stronger than us. It's practically our specialty. "And if they had killed you instead?" Daniel's smile faded. "Then Earth would have sent the others. There are 11 more operatives with my level of training, Laura. Each one is as dangerous as I am, some more so. If the Kreth had killed me, they would have faced something far worse than a diplomatic incident." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars that wheeled slowly past. "That's the message I was sent here to deliver," he continued. "Humanity doesn't want war. We want peace. We want to trade and explore and learn from other species. But if war comes to us, we will not be easy prey. We have spent our entire history preparing for this moment. Laura, we have trained and fought and bled and died to reach the stars, and we will not be denied our place among them." Laura rose and joined him at the window. For a while, they stood in silence, watching the distant lights of civilizations that were only now beginning to understand what humanity truly was. "What happens now?" she asked.
"Now we wait," Daniel said.
"The council will reconvene tomorrow. They will have had time to digest what they saw, and more importantly, what it means. They know now that humanity is not weak. The question is whether they're smart enough to realize that makes us more valuable as allies than as enemies." He turned to look at her, and there was something like hope in his gray eyes. "If they're smart, we might just get what we came here for, and no one else has to get hurt." Laura nodded slowly. "And if they're not smart?" Daniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold and patient and infinitely dangerous. "Then I'll do what I was trained to do," he said simply, "and the galaxy will learn why humanity calls me Pale Horse." 1 week had passed since the incident in the Grand Chamber. 1 week of closed-door meetings, frantic communications between homeworlds, and careful reconsiderations of positions that had seemed set in stone. The galaxy had changed, and everyone knew it. The only question was whether they would adapt or resist. Daniel stood before the mirror in his quarters, adjusting his tie with the same precision he brought to everything else. The cuts on his cheek had healed, leaving only faint pink lines that would fade completely within a few more days. His suit was freshly pressed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a diplomat representing his species at the most important moment in their history. Only his eyes betrayed the truth. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, done too much, carried burdens that would crush lesser souls. Laura knocked and entered without waiting for a response. She had changed in the past week, grown more confident, more sure of herself. Watching Daniel face down the entire Galactic Council had taught her something important about courage and conviction. "They're ready for us," she said. Daniel nodded and followed her out of the room. The Grand Chamber looked different today. The platforms had been rearranged, subtly but noticeably. Humanity's platform was no longer the lowest in the room. It had been raised to the same level as the other minor species. A small change that carried enormous symbolic weight. The Kreth delegation had been significantly reduced. The ambassador who had struck Daniel was gone, recalled in disgrace. His replacement was a younger Kreth, smaller and less aggressive, who kept his eyes carefully fixed on the floor whenever Daniel looked in his direction. The Vorthani High Speaker called the session to order. Its mandibles clicked with considerably less contempt than they had shown during the previous meetings. "The Council has spent the past 7 days in deliberation," it announced. "We have considered humanity's petition in light of recent events, and we have reached a decision." Daniel stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face revealing nothing. Beside him, Laura held her breath. "It is the judgment of this council that humanity meets the criteria for provisional membership in the galactic community." The words hung in the air like a bell that had just stopped ringing. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a murmur swept through the chamber, delegates exchanging glances and whispered comments in a dozen different languages. "This membership is conditional," the High Speaker continued. "Humanity will be subject to a probationary period of 50 standard years, during which they must demonstrate their commitment to peaceful coexistence and respect for galactic law. During this period, they will have limited voting rights and will be excluded from certain sensitive committees." Daniel inclined his head. "On behalf of Earth and all her people, I thank the Council for this opportunity. We accept these conditions and will work diligently to prove that your trust is not misplaced." The formal proceedings continued for several more hours, covering the details of trade agreements, diplomatic protocols, and the 1,000 other small matters that governed relations between species. Daniel handled each negotiation with skill and patience, never pushing too hard, never backing down too easily. He was, Laura realized, genuinely good at this. The violence of the previous week seemed like something from a dream, hard to connect with the calm, articulate man who discussed agricultural tariffs as if they were the most important things in the universe. When the session finally ended, the delegates began to filter out of the chamber. Most avoided Daniel, giving him a wide berth as they passed. But a few approached, offering congratulations or simply studying him with undisguised curiosity. The Mithrani delegate was among them. Its liquid silver form rippled as it came to stand before Daniel, and when it spoke, its voice carried a note of genuine respect. "We misjudged your species," it said. "We saw your history of violence and assumed it defined you. We did not understand that you had learned to control it, to use it as a tool rather than let it use you." Daniel considered his response carefully. Every species has the capacity for violence. What matters is whether you can direct it toward constructive ends. Humanity has spent its entire history learning that lesson. We have fought ourselves more than we have fought anyone else. And through all those wars, all those mistakes, we have survived. He paused. "We always survive." The Mithranese form shimmered. "You could have killed those warriors. You chose not to. Killing them would have started a war. Showing mercy achieved the same purpose without the bloodshed." Daniel smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. That is what humanity does at its best. We find ways to win without destroying everything around us. It took us a long time to learn that lesson. We're still learning it, to be honest. But we're getting better. The Mithrani extended a tendril of silver that touched Daniel's hand briefly before withdrawing. "Perhaps your species has more to teach than we realized. Perhaps we have been the ones who needed to learn." It glided away, leaving Daniel alone with Laura in the vast empty chamber. "We did it," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We actually did it." Daniel looked up at the crystal dome overhead at the stars that had always seemed so far away and were now, finally, within humanity's reach. We did the first part, he corrected her. Getting in the door was the easy part. Now comes the real work. Building relationships, earning trust, proving that we belong here. He started walking toward the exit, and Laura fell into step beside him. What happens to you now? She asked. Do you go back to Earth? Back to the sad? Daniel was quiet for a moment. No, he said finally. That part of my life is over. I've spent 30 years learning how to kill. Now I need to spend the time I have left learning how to build. He stopped at the entrance to the chamber and turned to face her. Laura, there's a lot of work to do, and I think I can be useful. Not as a weapon, but as a bridge. Someone who understands both what humanity is capable of and what we can become. Laura nodded slowly. The galaxy is still afraid of us. Yes, and they should be, to some extent. Fear is a useful tool when used correctly. It keeps people careful. It prevents the kind of casual cruelty that the Kreth showed us in the beginning. Oh. Daniel's expression softened. But fear alone isn't enough. We need them to respect us, and eventually to trust us. That's a longer road, but it's the only one that leads somewhere worth going. They walked out of the chamber together into a future that was uncertain but full of possibility. Behind them, the empty platforms stood silent in the starlight, witnesses to a moment that would be remembered for centuries. Humanity had come to the stars with nothing but their courage, their ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to survive. They had faced the contempt of older, more powerful species. They had been insulted, attacked, and very nearly subjugated, and they had won. Not through conquest or domination, but through a single, carefully calculated demonstration of what they were capable of. They had shown the galaxy that humans could be more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And then they had shown something even more impressive. The restraint to not use that power unless absolutely necessary. Daniel Cole, death in a suit, walked toward the human delegation's shuttle with the easy stride of a man who had accomplished what he set out to do. The cuts on his face were healing. The blood on his hands had been washed away. And somewhere in his chest, in the place where he had long ago buried everything that made him human, something stirred hope. After all these years, after all the blood and pain and sacrifice, there was hope. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. Now they just had to prove they deserved to keep it. The shuttle's engines hummed to life. Daniel Cole settled into his seat to begin the long work of building peace. Because that was the truth that the galaxy was only now beginning to understand. Humans didn't want war. They wanted neighbors and partners and friends. They wanted to explore the universe and learn its secrets and share in its wonders. But when someone threatened them, when diplomacy failed, when there was no other choice, humanity had people like Daniel Cole, people who had been trained to do terrible things so that others wouldn't have to, people who carried the weight of violence so that the rest of their species could reach for the stars with clean hands. Death in a suit. Pale horse. A weapon made human, or perhaps a human-made weapon. And he was very, very,